is a big problem in the world because we as a people collectively, we are very resourceful. But at the same time, there are challenges. And one of the biggest challenges, which touches on a human need to exist, you need to eat, okay? Food. But still, we have some challenge in that regard. So I want us to go down the rabbit hole today on Business Today. My name is Noah Kipkimboy, and welcome to the show. Without wasting much time, let's begin. Where is the world right now? 8.2 billion people. That's a lot of people, and it's growing by the day. Of that, 1.5 billion are from Africa, okay? Now, let's talk about food. Enough food is produced to feed the world, but still, since we produce enough to fill the world, still 733 million people sleep hungry. That is sad. 733 million people sleep hungry. Now, with that statistic, we move to take a look at a deeper, that 733 million people. What does it mean? It means that 1 in 11 people go to bed hungry each night. Have you ever slept hungry? Ask yourself. It's not a good experience. That is what is going on. 1 in 11 across the world are sleeping hungry each and every single day. And you ask why. One of the biggest contributors is conflict, climate change, and chronic inequality. Okay? Now, since we have established that hunger is a huge problem, let's talk about the impact of hunger. 50% of child death is caused by hunger. So we are losing the next generation because we can't get food from one point to the other, or other external factors like climate change contributing to that. We also have 148 million children are stunted globally. In fact, somebody once made a joke that, no, you would have been taller if you were eating properly. So stunting is a huge problem when you don't eat correctly. So our children are not growing up to the potential that they ought to in that regard. And it boils down to matters food. Now, most affected area, of course, we know Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia. These are common areas that feature in these discussions when we're tackling problems across the world. There we are. Now, let's talk food waste, because our focus today is on food waste. Food loss and food waste. Now, an estimated 13% of food, that is an equivalent of 931 million tons, or 120 kilograms per capita, were lost in the supply chain from after harvest and prior to reaching the retail shelves. After harvest, prior to reaching the shelf, we are losing this amount of food. What is happening right there? We'll be examining that. Also, an estimated 1.05 billion tons of food were wasted in households, food services, and in retail. Okay? And this statistic, actually, it goes back several years, almost 2 years ago, 2022. So, most likely, this figure has gone up. So the big question is, today, even as we mark the International Day of Awareness of Food Loss and Waste, which is coming up on the 29th of this month, what is happening? Well, the theme of this year's actually International Day of Awareness of Food Loss and Waste touches on climate finance and food loss, for food loss and waste reduction. Now, you ask yourself, why does climate interact with food loss? That's why we have a heavy panel with us here today. Of course, on the far end, we have Michael Onchabo, Director, Food and Land Use Coalition, that is Folu, Kenya. Thank you very much for making time. We also have Caroline Maina, Project Director at NutriServe, TechnoServe Kenya. Karibu sana. And lastly, you have Nekeso Wafula, Vice Chair, Society of Crop Agribusiness Advisors. It's called SOCA. Welcome to Business Today. So, thank you. First of all, let us establish the foundation here, ladies and gentlemen. This issue of food waste and food loss in Kenya, and I want to start with you, Michael. How big of a problem is it as we speak right now in Kenya?
Yeah, thanks, Noah. And just to go straight to your question, I think in Kenya we have a very serious problem. Just going by the global statistics and scale it down to the Kenyan situation, it is that bad. And of course, we have FAO figures that we rely on, showing us that we have massive loss of food in the supply chains. So between, of course, 30 and 40%, but we also now kind of trying to narrow down to our specific value chains and establish how much of that waste is, because different value chains, we have different losses that are experienced. Talk of the fish industry, probably the vegetable industry, the cereals. They're in different varying proportions.
Okay.
Yes, but it is that serious, and of course the global contribution again to greenhouse gas emissions because of the waste that goes into landfills.
Okay.
It's approximated, of course, around 8 to 10% of all that waste that goes to rot in landfills producing those emissions. So it is that bad.
It is a big, big problem.
Exactly.
Caroline, I mean, you work for NutriServe, and just from NutriServe itself, it touches on nutrition. You know, it's not just enough to have food, but it's also important to have quality food. Already, we've just seen the statistics. Almost 733 million people are sleeping hungry each and every single night in Kenya. Now, link that to nutrition. Is nutrition another layer of problem from lack of food that we're facing right now?
Exactly. So WHO states, reports that less than 2% of the population in Kenya accesses the recommended 400 grams of fruit and vegetable on a daily basis. Average capita is around 140 grams is what is consumed right now. So you have one challenge on one side, having 30 to 40% getting wasted, and on the other side, people, over 98% not consuming the recommended 400 grams. So how can we create pathways between food loss and waste and improving nutrition? And by that, we will improve the children and the population nutrition levels.
Definitely. Nekesa, you know, Society of Crop Agribusiness Advisors sounds like a very important, you know, society, because you're advising on critical issues on matters food. And in Kenya, we've had this challenge of, we have starvation in some parts of the country, and cows are eating cabbages on the other end of the country. What exactly is going on there? What do you think is the foundation of this inequality, this seesaw that we see in the country in regards to access to food?
I think there are varied of issues that have to be raised. I think these are things that are always being discussed, but maybe not actioned. For example, if you're talking about the cows, maybe in Nyandarua eating the cabbage, for example, you look at how much cabbage is being produced in Nyandarua vis-a-vis those maybe people who are starving in Turkana, and you see there's a disconnect in terms of how do we get this cabbage to Turkana? Or the other option is, how do we dry this cabbage or even process it to a value, to another form that can be utilized better without it going to loss? So there's usually a disconnect between what is actually happening on the ground and what is actualized, what is supposed to be happening. Okay. So I think one of the things that we do as SOCA is try to do advocacy and try to ensure that, you know, at county level, through various partners, we are able to share some of the various ways in which they can improve on, you know, things like value addition, things like, you know, how do we get products, how do we connect farmers? There are several innovations. How do we connect farmers to the market? How do we ensure that people know where the price is right to sell their products? Because I think the other thing is those farmers probably prefer giving their cabbage to the cows because the price is not favorable.
Yes.
So how do we get them to favorable, you know, market situations?
Definitely.
So those are the things that we try to advocate for.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was looking at some numbers. By the year 2050, actually, close to $2.6 trillion is needed to towards climate financing. Yeah, and this goes towards different areas. When you talk about climate financing, in Africa, we are losing almost 50 billion annually as we project towards 2030. Michael, I'd like you to help us make this connection. When you talk about food loss and waste and climate change and the need for climate financing, what is that nexus?
Yeah, thanks, Noah. Definitely when you talk about food loss and waste and the climate connection, it is very interrelated. One thing is very clear, that whatever that we produce is using resources. That is land, water, energy, and everything else. So the resources that have been used to produce the food, including what I've just mentioned, and that food doesn't get to where it was supposed to be at the table, yeah, for human consumption. So if that is lost, then it means the resources that were utilized, the land that was tilled, the nutrients that were probably added, the fertilizers and everything else, the water that was utilized, all that has gone to waste. And look at it this way also, that that means then that food that has already gone to waste, it lands definitely in the landfills, and the decomposition that happens there, of course, you see around the country what happens in terms of the decomposition and anaerobic conditions. The production of the greenhouse gases that happens from there, especially methane, definitely contributes to global change. And of course, scientists tell us that methane has a high potent in global warming than carbon dioxide itself. Yeah, the affinity to hold to heat in the atmosphere, it's higher than what carbon dioxide does. So that means then whatever that has gone to landfills and that has decomposed is accelerating, the global warming that we are crying out of. And of course, definitely then, how does that connect to climate finance? I mean, a lot of these changes of climate change, when climate change happens, it also contributes to the food loss and waste.
Definitely. Directly,
because of, poor products or the failed rains and all that. Okay. So to get enough finance to bring this together, so one, to address the climate changes that are happening, but also enough finance to bring on board interventions that will reduce all this amount of food that is going to loss and waste.
Definitely. And Caroline, I want to bring you in, because sometimes when we talk about nutrition and climate change, we've seen the adverse effects in the country, floods and drought. Okay? These are major extremes. We've seen loss of lives on both extremes. And now, focusing on this particular day that is coming up to raise awareness on food loss and waste, they're talking about this issue of financing, so that we finance climate as an intervention to food loss and waste. From where you sit, especially from somebody who's very, let me not say who's very nutritious conscious, I know it sounds fun, but your nutrition is your key, making sure that people are getting the right nutrition. What do you think are some of these interventions in regards to financing, this climate financing, can be wired to address this issue of food loss and waste?
Thank you. So TechnoServe really is looking at the three components on food loss and waste, climate, and nutrition. So there are different pathways to get into addressing climate change and nutrition. So areas of financing would be around getting innovative climate financing towards especially processors or people who can take volumes from landfill into upcycling or donations, food donations. And this is more towards creating capital expenditure for equipment that could be able to condense whatever is the cabbages, the tomatoes, the mangoes, into a product that can be used across the year. And most importantly, to create awareness on demanding non-augmented food. So this is food that has not been added more items into it and still retains the natural elements in it. So how I see it and where we sit in TechnoServe, we look at the whole food system and looking at from production to processing to distribution to consumers, thinking through what kind of solutions, either fresh rescuing, how do you rescue into a commercial kitchen or a food bank, or two, into a semi-processed product that can be used across the year and not getting into landfill and increasing that methane uptake into the climate.
Okay. Nekesa, now looking at the food that we eat as a country, majority of it, and I'm very passionate about this because it's the smallholder farmer that feeds this country. When you talk about 40%, employment coming from the agricultural sector in this country, it is majority of those smallholder farmers. So if at all we are to impact change, we have to target these smallholder farmers. And you guys are minding agribusiness and advising. Talk to me about when we source for financing to make interventions. How do we bring in the smallholder farmer, and how, what are some of these interventions at the level of the smallholder farmer in this country?
First of all, I would like to correct you. It's not just 40, but it's over 70%.
70?
Both direct and indirect, because when we talk about employment, we are talking not just at the farming level, but we are talking about also the processing company. So it's actually over that 40.
Yes.
So when we talk about the financing of the smallholder, if you look at the structure of the smallholder farmer, usually it's very difficult to have one single smallholder farmer to get financing or to get support into the activities that will be friendly and ensure that they are climate sensitive, like the activities they are doing on the ground. So what we are doing on the ground is working with the counties at the county level, and through the county, they're able to aggregate farmers into groups. And through groups, then it's easier to actually, administer some of these innovations that would then tap into the climate finance that would enable them now get the financing that is required for them to do sustainable farming. And when you talk about sustainable farming, we are talking about things like conservation agriculture, where you're not affecting so much of the soil, you're not, destroying the structure of the soil. You're ensuring that you're doing circular economy. I know that's a big term.
Yeah.
It's very simple. It's just recycling. By ensuring that you're putting whatever like if you have cows, you're putting back the animal waste back to the soil. And the county comes in at a very good level, whereby there's the training aspect, the capacity building aspect for those farmers, because not all of them know how to make a good manure, so they make it in a good way. Not all of them understand what this circular economy is, but if they are broken down into simplistic ways and in an understandable way, then they are able to get what we are doing. The key point is to have the information, because we have, what I would say, we have policies. We have very big policies that we have. I know, like TechnoServe, they all understand these policies.
Yes.
But now when you talk about the smallholder farmer, they would not even understand what that is. But then with the society, then it becomes easier, because we can break it down for the farmer. And working with the county at that level, then it makes it easier for the farmers to understand in a simple way, and therefore be able to disseminate the same information in their groups. So the key point is get them in groups, cooperatives, circles. Then they can access some of these innovative technologies and also finance towards that.
Very important. Michael, follow, you've been told you have these policies and they are massive. And the smallholder farmer looks at them and they're like, nah. So talk to me, but we understand the importance of policy because it sets the tone. And if we go wrong at the policy level, and you've seen a lot of introduction, even in bills in Parliament recently touching on the agricultural sector, and the people are really keen, how is it affecting us? So talk to me about some of the policy interventions that will ensure there is proper flow of this climate finance into the Kenyan ecosystem to make these interventions that we've mentioned briefly.
Yeah, thanks, Noah, for that. Most importantly, I think the incorporation of food loss and waste elements and strategies in policy formulation. So, for example, the Kenyan government has, developed with other stakeholders the policy or the strategy on post-harvest management for food loss and waste, which is to be launched, I think, next month.
Yes.
Yeah. So that is one way that, some of these strategies need to be well developed, but also well understood by the public. So after, for example, developing and inaugurating and publishing them, we need to now take it to the ground, like Nekesa is saying, so that they are aware about this. But also, some of the very important things, for example, most countries now are required to develop or revise the NDCs, the national determined contributions. And some of these elements need to be incorporated into the NDCs, because that is what then factors how our plans going forward will be addressing food loss and waste. The national climate action plans, that needs to focus strongly on food loss and waste. So any strategies that address food loss and waste need to be incorporated in those strategies.
Okay.
Leave alone the the national or the county strategies. We have now supporting some of the counties in agroecology or regenerative agriculture, all those or food system strategies wholesomely to address whole food system strategies in the county level, both at national level and county levels.
Okay.
So all that needs to be incorporated, and that definitely will then speak to allocation of probably resources to be able to implement those strategies that have been captured in those plans and strategies and policies as well.
Definitely. Our time is running out. Caroline, I know at Technos you see it as POV of private sector, yeah? So from what is mentioned, is there maybe briefly a backlog or sort of a barrier that is preventing proper flow of money into the Kenyan ecosystem to make sure that you're funding some of these interventions that you guys are doing?
Yeah, so I would call it 3 different points. So private sector is in 2 parts. The formal side, where you have the big processors, exporters, and formal retailers. And then there's the informal sector, where over 80% of our produce goes through into Marikiti and other markets. Okay. So I would say getting financing to tier 1 traders, people who aggregate from farm to market, they pass it on along the chain or the supply chain on credit. Okay. So getting conducive or innovative solutions that could help them get access to finance to go back to market many times, to the farms many times to bring the produce. That's one point. Another point I see is also on government, especially there's a lot of research that shows that the road infrastructure is really wanting. So because of heavy rains and floods, you find the roads being disconnected from one point to the other. Okay. So food loss and waste happens. You can harvest a good tomato, but it won't get past where the road is bad. Okay. Okay. So that's another point where government could come in. Okay. And the third part I also see is where we could get easy financing for processors. It's very heavy on private sector to bring big equipment. Would you know that Egypt is the biggest importer, brings a lot of tomato paste into Kenya? Yet we have Kenyan farmers in Kimana and in Kirinyaga growing tomatoes every day. Okay. Yet we lose over 32% of that. So I can assure you that if we got the right condensers, the right equipment, they could be able to take up all this food loss and waste and help all year-round supply.
Okay, our time is up. It would be unfair to you, Nakesa, if I close out the show right now. In less than 20 seconds, intervention at the personal level, me in my house, how can I prevent food loss and waste? Briefly, less than 20 seconds,
I think we need to learn how to be innovative around ways in which we can prevent, like for example, fermentation, simple fermentation process, simple boiling, freezing, to reduce sharing with your neighbors, call a bash if you have to, so that we don't waste food. That's just ensuring that we are not wasting a lot of food. And the last thing is just in terms of knowing what is, the real cost of everything. Like, why am I sleeping hungry? Because I can't access food. Why can't I access food? Because maybe it's costly. Why is it costly? Because of X. And those questions we need to ask ourselves and see, how can the government now come in? How can I as a person come in and make sure that food is not expensive, it's accessible, and I'm not wasting it?
Definitely. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen. All right, that is Michael Onchabo, Director for Kenya. We have Caroline Maina, Project Director, NutriServe at Technos of Kenya, and Nekesa Ofula, Vice Chair, Society of Crop Agribusiness Advisors. And that's where we put a full stop. Remember, 29th is International Day of Awareness of Food Loss and Waste. Make sure that responsibility begins from you. As we put a full stop to today's show. My name is Nokit Kimboy. Thank you very much for being with us. Up next, we have the KTN. Stay tuned. You guys were so much fun.